Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our conversation. We hope your Saturday is starting on a great note. And with that, let's get into what we really want to talk about today. Let's start with something really simple. A no is a complete sentence. And yet, for a lot of capable, high performing women, it's rarely that. It rarely stays that way. It becomes context, justification, sometimes even an apology. Not because they don't know what they want to say, but because no still feels too abrupt, too risky, too exposed. So instead of saying no, many women manage the moment. They soften it, they explain it, they make it more acceptable. And over time, that becomes the default. And if your no needs an explanation every time, it's not being treated as a decision, but it's being treated as a discussion. Hi, I'm Gandharvi, and I'm joined by Vidya and Simi. Hey guys,
Hello.
our work Hey, our work is centered around helping women moving out of overthinking into clarity, particularly when they're navigating change, transitions, and decisions that carry weight. And this is a topic we feel really strongly about because this is where we see a big gap. Women who are very clear internally, but find it difficult to express that clarity cleanly in the moment. And over time, that gap becomes between clarity and expression starts shaping their decisions, their time, and how they're engaging at work. So let's start by making this very real. What does this actually look like when someone struggles to say no? Because this doesn't show up as confusion, it shows up in the moments that look completely normal on the surface, but are carrying a lot more underneath. So, I'm going to talk about a situation about a woman leader. And let's see how we talk about it and unpack that as we go. So, let's call this senior leader Ananya. Ananya is known for being dependable, the person people go to when things need to get done well. It's the middle of the week. She's really busy. Her calendar is packed. She's managing multiple priorities, and there are a couple of things at work that genuinely need her attention. And at the same time, there's something important happening at home. Her parents are visiting after a very long time. She's been trying very consciously to leave work on time this week, just so that she can spend a few uninterrupted hours with them. It's something, she's already had to push a couple of times. Now, in the middle of all of this, a message comes in from a senior stakeholder. Hey, I need your help on something. It shouldn't take too long, but it's important. And she knows what that means. It won't be quick, it will spill into her evening, and it will cost at the end, it will come at a cost at the end because this is something she's been already trying to protect. In that moment, the answer is actually very clear. She doesn't have the capacity, professionally or personally. But that's not what happens next. Instead, there's a pause. And in that pause, the response starts to take shape, not as a no, but as something that sounds like, I'd really like to help. It's just that this week is quite packed. But let me see what I can do. And very often, the sentence quietly turns into a yes. I'm sure all of you listening can relate to it and have experienced it. Now, what we just heard in that situation is not confusion, it's over explanation. The decision was clear, but the response wasn't. And this is exactly how it shows up in professional settings. A request comes in, and instead of a decision, what follows is a structured response: context, reassurance, intent. And then somewhere at the end, the actual answer appears. And the more capable and experienced someone is, the more likely they are to do this. Because at that stage, you're not just managing work, you're managing expectations. You've built a reputation, dependable, responsive, someone who steps in and delivers. So when Ananya hesitates in the moment, it's not because she doesn't know what to say, it's because feels that saying no would actually feel like stepping slightly outside what people actually expect from her. And that's where the explanation comes in, not to clarify the decision, but to protect how she's perceived while making that decision. Because when a no starts needing explanation, it stops being a decision and starts becoming a discussion.
And I agree to you, Gandharvi. And I feel like in the situation of Ananya, it's not just the professional. I think there's a line of profession, what happening, which feels like it's a capacity issue, which simply you can say no. But behind the scenes in this case, and I have spoken to many women and they have agreed to this, that there is a relationship or this association thing going on which is adding too much pressures, because behind the scene her mind is not thinking like, okay, I have work, I have commitments, I can say no, but her mind is says like, if I said no, what they will think of me, what if I will be rejected, what if my worth will be questioned, what if I will be seen as an irresponsible. And that criticism, that self judgment is not going only on the professional front. Behind her scene, like her mind is at a millisecond computing these questions like, what if my parents will think? I've already put off these things in the past as well. Everyone gonna think like I am the responsible. It's always my fault. I cannot manage better. And all these questions add too much stress on her, and it always becomes like a personal issue, which is like a, I am this person who can never manage, or I am this person who cannot say no to anyone because I feel responsible to them. And it very easily blends into this idea of, I need to be responsible and accountable for how other people's gonna feel, and it's on my shoulder and it's on my responsibility, so I have to bear that. And when this starts going on in this case, the lines blur very easily, and then it spends like, it's all about me, and it's all about how I will be perceived, and not really about just saying a no because I have my hands full.
Well, I think, thank you, Gandharvi, with starting this conversation with a very strong example that everybody could relate. And how I see is that you touched upon, the workplace patterns and experiences, whereas, Simi, you touched upon the relationships, the relationship between, Ananya, her parents, and also at work. But what's really interesting about Ananya's situation for me is that you said there is a slight pause before she responds, right? So from the outside, it's just few seconds, it's just negligible. But inside, a lot of things are happening, and almost a lot of things are happening in her head. It almost feels like her mind is constantly scanning for things. So she thinks in that situation, like, if I say so, what does that mean? Will I look bad or will I disappoint them? She is consciously not thinking about all of this sitting there, but that hesitation that shows up is probably in all these questions and the in betweens. I think she already knows what she wants to say because her hands are full. She is already stretched. But she cannot, in that moment, say that she cannot take this extra piece of work because she's already committed herself to other things outside of work, which is personal in nature. But I think the problem is that even when she knows all of this, she is not able to see it clearly and say it out loud. And that's where, in her mind, she starts filling in the blanks. So she assumes how that person might react and probably writes a complete essay how this might create tension between them if she says no. And eventually, what happens is that it is not about the request anymore because she has blown this thing up out of proportion in her head. Now it becomes what her no says about her. So it's more internalized than the situation by itself. So she starts spiraling, thinking, "Ah, if I say no, will they think, am I still dependable? Will they come back to me with more, inputs and work? Because, the worthiness of high performing women, unfortunately, gets tied to their work and work alone. And her questions might be, am I letting someone down? Which you spoke about, Simi, is that, will this relationship be the same if I say no? Or will this change how people see me? So that's where her response kind of starts to shift and take a different direction. Now it's no more like the answer is not clear to her. But for her, Ananya in this case, it's saying it out loud feels much more harder than it should. So what's happening isn't just in her head, her body is kind of reacting to it as well. So even a small chance of discomfort, like anybody else, like disappointing someone or creating awkwardness, is just enough for the system to trigger that immediate response saying, I want to move away from this situation as quick as possible. So now the question quietly changes, right? It's no longer what do I want to do with this situation? It becomes more like how do I make this easier for me right now? So somehow it becomes like saying yes, or the quick cushioning of saying no kind of achieves that situation for her, and then she starts over explaining. And I would like to tie in something that we all spoke about, right? Like the people pleasing. And this is probably where it seeps in, but it's not done as a conscious choice. It's always done because somebody has to ease that discomfort. So if you're saying a no, you follow it up with yes and I am sorry, and the apology, cycle starts. So even over explaining in this case isn't really about the other person who actually got the request in. It's more about Ananya, who's trying to make the moment feel much more safer for her. So she starts cushioning it so she doesn't have to sit with that awkwardness or tension. And on top of that, let me add a couple of thoughts, and then we'll see where this goes. So, on top of that, she already is stretched. So, we spoke about how much work she has, and she has to go back to home because her parents are coming. And she's managing work, she's managing expectations, both at work and in her personal life. And she's showing up constantly in a certain way. So, the dependable one, right? But when this situation arises where it asks more of her and she has no more to give, she doesn't have that energy to hold those boundaries firmly anymore. So, yes, isn't always fully intentional per se. It's just that the easiest way to get through with that moment.
I agree with what you said, Vidya, and I feel like if we go even deeper into these nuances of why women respond like this, or why Ananya is acting in this way in this example, for particularly if we just talk about this example for the ease of talking about it, I feel like a lot of also it comes from which you already consider like discomfort, and in that micro millisecond of that pause there's tons of things happening behind the scenes in our head, and I think a lot of it takes shape from the early conditioning of us. So many high achieving women who has been very successful, and as you rightly pointed out that for many high achieving women, their work somehow becomes their sense of self-worth or the value they add in, and the lines between two, the lines between their productivity and their personal worth kinds of blends in. And this I think starts because I have seen this pattern in many women, and I've, any women have talked to, I've noticed in them that it starts very early in their childhood, because these women, maybe because of their conditioning, somehow assume that being useful is being appreciated, being responsible, like taking the burden of everyone and pleasing everyone, is also a kind of a protective shield. Being obeying and being obedient and just not trying to hurt or go against anyone or trigger anyone is an easy way for them to avoid conflicts. And yes, for
Right.
them, managing conflicts or being seen as irresponsible or not loved or very feel can feel like very selfish, and they avoid it since very childhood, and they carry this pattern even in their adulthood, in personal context, in professional context. And I can see that very clearly in this case of Ananya, that if we talk about her and maybe we talk about her early experiences, she may be able to point that yes, there has been one at least instance where she felt like in her childhood she gained this conditioning or this association as a little child that If she's not being useful, she's irresponsible. If she's not complying or obedient or accommodating for other people's need, even at the cost of her own boundaries or at the cost of her own inner and outer comfort, she's gonna be seen as bad person. So it's also a lot of good girl syndrome getting weaved in. And this conditioning runs a lot of this behavior on a very unconscious way. So it's like that millisecond, because there's a whole repetitive pattern of this conditioning repeated over and over and over again. And I think, Gandharvi, you can lead us if this pattern have you seen in the professional context as well, being your experience of working with women, even in corporate as a HR and now as a coach.
Absolutely. I think you both have like given such interesting perspectives. And if we look at Ananya from a adulthood standpoint, right now that she's in the corporate world and managing personal life, professional life, I think we have spoken to many women who have been in the same boat. And I think all of us have been in the same boat at some point of time as well, and
Right.
probably are in it. So, when we speak to women, it comes down to the same point. They know their bandwidth is stretched, similar to what you and Vidya mentioned, Simi. They know they should say no. They know at this juncture it's not a clarity problem. But when that moment comes, they don't say a clean no. And we've discussed that, they'll say, talk about, am I the dependable one anymore or not? If I don't say anything, it'll be taken on as, okay, she's going to get the job done. And I think that's where in organizations the pattern starts forming. So organizations, from my experience and everyone that we worked with in the past, they always don't just respond to capability, they respond to a behavior pattern. So as an example, if you keep doing execution, you will get execution works. If you keep saying yes, you will keep getting asked and you will continue to say yes. And in Ananya's case, if every time Ananya was asked to do something and she absorbed the work, even when she didn't want to, the system kind of said, okay, she'll do it. Not just that she can do it, but that she will do it. And over time, that's actually become the role for Ananya or for anyone else who's in a situation like this. Not in official capacity, but the functional role that she plays in the organization. The one who will step in, the one who will fill the gaps, the one who makes things happen, things work. But here's an important part. This is not happening because Ananya or other women actually lack boundaries. It's happening because the cost of saying no, as you both mentioned, feels higher than the cost of saying yes. So we've been brought up to be dependable, reliable, you never say no. And that kind of spills into work as well, because we want people to think that we can do everything. And in that moment, when someone says yes, in Ananya's case as well, she's just not made a workload decision. She's actually navigating the perception, reliability, reputation, and the biggest part is the future opportunity point of view. And that's why this feels difficult for many women, including Ananya, not because they don't know what to do, but because they understand exactly what saying no might trigger. So so what looks like hesitation is actually a calculated risk awareness. You're taking a risk by saying, okay, I'm going to say yes, I'll take on the work, because if I say no, I might not be viewed as the person who can get it all done. And that's the conditioning that most women kind of work with, even in the workplace on a day to day basis. And unless that pattern is interrupted or disrupted, as they say, the system will keep reinforcing the same expectations. And that's what happens in the workplace. At least that's what we have seen, what we have experienced, and what we've heard a lot of women also talk about.
Yeah.
And
I,
no, no, go ahead, Simi.
no, no, and I was about to ask you, because it feels like it's an identity issue. So I was thinking, like, with that, do you have any thoughts on this?
Thinking out loud, because I am a firm believer that when we go to work or when we are at home, we do hold a identity. It's not like completely a different mask you wear when you go to work. And we spoke about the conditioning, the social conditioning, the parenting styles, and also how we show up at work. I think this is where really things change for high achievers. In this case, we are talking about Ananya. If in that moment, right, when she was asked that question, can you take this on, She could have simply said, I can't do it right now, I already have plans. But the discomfort would still be there because there's this friction inside, right, where she's like, oh, what is the perception that the other people will create in their heads if I say no? So saying it and moving on will still leave such a discomfort in a person's mind. It wouldn't feel easy at all. Like all of a sudden, today I decide to set boundaries and I start saying no, it's not going to be easy. My body will still feel all that discomfort. And suddenly, you cannot expect anybody to just flip a switch and be done. So, in fact, I think her first instinct might be to always go back and add more context, right? Explain it better,
Mhm.
soften it, cushion it. And that urge will not go away all of a sudden just because she has noticed the pattern and she wants to act on it. But if she doesn't act on it and just tries to sit with it, give a pause, the discomfort will definitely peak. But then, what we generally see with our people who we work with is that that discomfort gently settles down as well. So what brings out in that moment is bit more clarity. So you're not completely pushing the hard pedal on the gas and saying, now I need to move, I need to run away from the situation. Rather, you try to sit with it, you handle it, and then you try, making that answer clear to the other person. So I think in this kind of a situation, what will happen is the internal conflict that she carries will try to go down. It'll soothe itself, right? So it's like a downward curve. She's not saying yes when she's meaning no. So she's taking a pause, digesting the fact, and clearly saying a no to it. And I think over time, what this creates is the space between the request and her response. And then that's where the bridge that we speak about is clarity. That's when it emerges. So this is not about reacting fast and choosing to, actually move from that direction. What it does, it changes the whole experience of a person internally. Before, the discomfort came from saying no, but now the
Mhm.
discomfort is just saying something she can sit with. So she is able to hold that space for herself and tell what she really means. And once this shift happens, I think the need to explain starts to lessen. And we have seen this in many people. Over time, with this practice, the over explaining goes away. Not because they are forcing, the brief, the pause, but because she doesn't feel like the pressure anymore. Ananya, in this case, for us, I think even when we are clear in whatever we want to say, I think holding that space for one before we actually speak out will make our internal equilibrium much more stable so we can live with what we are saying rather than going back to the same patterns that we were doing. Simi.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think you made the very valid point, and it was like I was exactly thinking like how we have already talked about that why women in this situation struggle and what does it look like. But I was simply wondering that what would happen if like a person like Ananya learned to say no clearly, and what that look like in future, like once the transition happens and once that process has taken care of in her, what does that world on the other side look like? And I think you already gave a little bit of insight on it, but I would like to hear more back from you. But first of all, I would like to hear from Gandharvi because she has set this stage, like how does it look like on the professional world. So Gandharvi, what do you think in that context? Because you brought this example, you started with this example. What do you think Nanya will look like when she has learned to say no without needing to cushion it or add a essay-like explanation to justify her no?
So thanks, Simi, for that. And, I'd love for you to chime in as well from the relationship side of this. But I think what's interesting is what Vidya covered. When you say no, how the body reacts. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
also an aspect of when you start saying no, how the organization reacts. So, the first time Ananya says a clear no, as an example, like an unlayered no, without over explaining it, without cushioning it, something would change. One, the person
Mm-hmm.
who's listening, and one for her. So, it wouldn't be dramatic, it wouldn't be, something that would give a jolt, but then to Vidya's point, even the organization would pause, the person listening would pause because it's totally unexpected. All this while you've been saying yes, and suddenly you're like, I'm sorry, but no, I'm not going to be able to do it right now. And the fact is that until now, Ananya and so many women like Ananya have been predictable. So they would just take it on or just, would gently negotiate. But suddenly, when there's a clean boundary, and what that does is that disrupts the pattern, not the relationship in the sense of between the person and her, but the pattern. Because now the system or the organization has a new set of information that this person may not always say yes. This person is not automatically available. This person is making a choice. And that is the important fact from an organization lens. Because in organizations, people aren't just evaluated on output. If you keep churning things and delivering, you're considered as great, as someone who can get stuff done. But people are also evaluated on how they operate under pressure and expectations. A clear no in this case in an organization signals something very different. It signals judgment, it signals prioritization, it signals self governance. Does it create discomfort, to Vidya's point? Yes, it does for a while. And that's okay. Discomfort is fine because it changes how others would also start to engage with you over a point of time. So instead of being available all the time, it starts repositioning you from someone who constantly takes work on to someone who also makes decisions about the work. And that shift, it's subtle. Sometimes it can be harsh, but it's subtle. But it's also such a powerful shift because over time, people don't just remember what you delivered, they also remember how you chose, how you made yourself available, and how you set a boundary. And for Ananya, the shift is not from saying yes to no. It's actually, in this case, it's from managing expectations to actually defining them. And that's where the real change begins, where the change happens from an organizational lens. But and I'm really curious, Simi, for you to share your thoughts about, there's an internal struggle, there's an external struggle. How does that kind of marry from a relationship standpoint?
I love what you said, Gandharvi, when you mentioned like that when people start saying no, it is seen as a pattern interrupt, which is, and inside it's gonna scream like, oh my god, why did I say that? And the panic monkeys will be all time high panicking like, danger, danger, we need to run, we need to. But after a moment, after that pause from both sides, like, okay, I hear you. And somehow the situation doesn't turn out to be a eclectic kind of point of view as the brain perceive, and that happens on the in relationship fronts as well. So while this person in this context, or we all can relate to that, when we say all this kind of thing, the behind the scene we are labeling everything about our identity and how we will be perceived in a relational context. We all are creature of tribe, and going against tribe feels like a feeling of abandonment, a feeling of loneliness. And I think it's wired in our priming eras, from that we are born, we are meant to bond and we meant to be a part of tribe. And going against the tribe feels like, oh, I will be abandoned and I'm the outcast. And nobody is ready for that. But just like you said, even in the relational context, whether it's professional relationship with your senior manager, with your own colleagues, with your acquaintances, and even at the personal side, when you start to lay down your boundaries and communicate it very clearly, somehow they notice the pattern interrupt. And sometimes it is also like take a minute to for them to also accept that pattern interrupt. But they start to see your worth, and beyond the external relationship, it heals your internal relationship with yourself. It lays down that self trust which you avoided and put down on external validation by overstretching yourself on the name of people pleasing, on the name of being useful, on the name of being obedient, the name of being nice girl. I feel like somewhere in there, because the person in this context just override their own needs, their own boundaries, and nothing of this is anti work. We are not saying that you should not honor your work or you should not take care of responsibilities. That is not the message here. The thing is, while doing all that, you need to also be coherent and cohesive about your internal alignment. Are you present there? Are you trusting? Are you saying what you really communicate? So that's first of all, I think, repair and strengthen your own self trust. And that reflected in other relationships as well, because just like on the professional field, even your personal relationship, people over a time, as they notice this change, they begin to appreciate you for standing up for yourself and communicate your clear boundaries. And it doesn't have to be a conflicting situation. It can be very polite way of communicating that my hands are full now. And I think Vidya would like to tell us even a deeper point, like how does the nervous system shapes in this context? Because as Gandharvi said, that professional world looks like that they accept the pause, they accept the no after a pause. I told you like our self trust repaired, but as the self trust repaired more, what do you think happens to the nervous system, Vidya?
Before we go to that point, I would chime into what you were actually saying about being part of that tribe, right? The sense of
Yeah.
belonging is what drives people to be what they are. And that's the also ties into how our internal nervous system is kind of wired as well. It needs safety, it needs safety in terms of people also agreeing to them, right? So whatever is the collective sense of yes automatically becomes our belief system as well. And I want to give a funny example which struck me when we guys were talking about tribe. There is a little ape in Japan who is going super crazy viral on all social media platforms because this little ape was abandoned by his tribe, his mother, at birth. And that is going viral because most of the people online are able to relate with that situation. And this is exactly where the internal nervous system comes into play, right? So the more you relate to something, as Gandharvi was saying, the more you are in that situation, the context that you create is, I will give you more work, and if you keep doing this, I'm going to come back with you with more work. It'll never be a point where someone pauses and says, oh yes, thank you for this extra mile that you have done, the extra mile that you have run. But we always say, right, it's a word that we very loosely use. It's always uphill from where we are. It applies for this situation as well, unfortunately. The more you say yes, the more it is going to put you in same patterns and same situations. So your nervous system is always on a constant, these wheels, the hamster wheels. It keeps doing the same thing over and over again. What happens is, at one point in time, it gets overloaded, and that is where people kind of break down completely. And nobody wants to do that, because once you reach that point, there is no coming back. Even even as we speak, right, there is more reflections that comes up, but we have to act on those instead of living with it. If you live with it, the point is, you're not going to change. If the situation is not willingly changed by somebody, then the cost of it should also be known by that person who is making that conscious change or trying to not. So this is where, I would say that if there is something that we should do, is that when we are reflecting, when we know that there's a certain pattern or a certain spiral that we are in, our internal system should not feel that repercussions. So people might start feeling tired, people will start removing themselves away from work or feeling that emotion. That drive shouldn't be there. Numbingness will not work all the time. Might be it would put a temporary patch on people, but on a long run, this is a space that no one should be. And with that, what I would say is, if we tend to explain ourselves, if we tend to overthink about certain situations, the first thing that is very much recommended is to have a pause. I've told this in many forums. What I do when I overthink is either find my space and my person to just, take me out of that, loop, or else I have a switch word, which is Momo. I like momos, but that immediately grounds me to my present reality, not the past and not the future. So it brings me back to this current reality saying, you are here. You need to take that one single step to move ahead rather than just being stuck. So I would encourage people to have those funny words for themselves as well.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I think the punch the monkey you were talking about, I think we all can
Yes.
relate to it. And before I hand over the closing thoughts to Gandharvi, I would like to add like advice that came to my mind when you were talking about the pause and finding your spaces. When I was like struggling from like similar kind of patterns a few years ago, one of my mentor told me that the best advice I can give you is slow down to speed up. And it's very counterintuitive advice because who wants to slow down, especially when they're high achiever and they wants to get things done and it's like now, 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 now. But I think it lands in that nervous system conditioning. And I think Gandharvi would agree with me on this that what we have been talking about, it's if like you can see yourself in Ananya, it's never an identity issue. It's a pattern that got conditioned consciously, unconsciously early in the childhood, or the way you were growing up. And after enough repetitions by default, it ingrained like, or it became like your default, but it's still not your personal flaw. It's still a pattern. And like any patterns, this pattern can also be recognized, interrupted, changed. So, what do you think, Gandharvi, on this?
I totally agree. And I can talk from just personal experience as well. It took me a very long time to say no. But now it's a little bit more easier. I just, when I know it goes against what I'm doing, when it goes against or doesn't align with what I want to do or I have to do, at that point of time, now it becomes easier for me to just say no. I will do it later. I may not say I will take it on, but I will set the boundary for when that will happen. And I think, as you said, Simi, it is a pattern. I think because we are so, it's what I call the unconscious pattern, right? So it's like when you wake up in the morning, brush your teeth, you may not remember if you've done it because you've done it subconsciously. It's just ingrained out of habit, and that's the disruption that we really hope women can start making without really disrupting everything around themselves. But it's okay to say no. It is a sentence, it's a complete sentence, no. So I totally agree with both of you. And I think, for me, a no doesn't damage responsibility. And I think that is something a lot of women are afraid of. If I say no, everything I have built all this time, will it suddenly get disrupted? No, it won't. Repeatedly, however, negotiating your no will dilute your clarity, your positioning, and your pattern. And that is something I think the three of us have spoken about at length. And over time, people don't respond to what you intend, they respond to what you signal. So it's your signals, your patterns, your clarity. So maybe the shift is my view. And I love to say this is not about learning how to say no better. We know how to say no. I think it's deciding that your no doesn't need to be justified, because no
Mhm.
is not a conversation, it's actually a discussion. It's a decision, it's not a discussion. So I think, for us, it's been great having the audience here. And if this pattern is something you recognize in yourself, start paying attention to what Simi and Vidya said. Pay attention to your internal system and yourself externally. Pay attention to where you're adding the explanation that isn't needed, because it doesn't need to be an essay. And that's usually where the shift will begin. And if you'd like to have more conversations like this, you can obviously watch this and rewatch this. But if you want to explore more, this in more depth for yourself, you can reach out to any of us. The details are in the comments below. And this is exactly the work that we focus on and the kind of work we do with women every single day, since we have gotten into this journey ourselves. So, with that, thank you everyone for watching. Hope you have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you all again soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.